An emergency summit following the deaths of 12 horses. New safety initiatives are coming to Churchill Downs.
The new rules include a pause of track-based incentives like start bonuses and also purse payouts, as well as restricting the number of starts per horse and ineligibility standards for poor performance. The new safety initiatives will take effect immediately. Well, with calls for safety at horse tracks, we wanted to know about the common injuries that racehorses have that can lead to their death.
WKYT's Grayson Passmore and photojournalist Darnell Crenshaw went to Rood and Riddle Equine Hospital to ask the experts.
And when you have clusters of deaths, it's a big deal, and I think we all should take a pause when that happens.
Dr. Alan Ruggles has performed surgery on all types of horses at Rood and Riddle Equine Hospital for the past 23 years. He says anytime a horse, even one, has to be put down due to an injury on the racetrack, it raises concern.
The regulatory agencies and veterinarians look at are there connections, whether it's albeit the people involved or surfaces, etc.
Dr. Ruggles is a busy man. We caught him between surgeries. On Thursday, he'll operate on 10 horses from different disciplines. He says the most common injury on racehorses are on the ankle.
In high energy injuries, meaning horses at high speed, those injuries tend to be very severe, and so some of those injuries aren't able to be repaired, but there are many racing injuries that we fix.
With the recent deaths, is the horse racing industry in trouble?
I don't think we're in trouble. I understand the reaction, and it's reasonable and it's natural and it's human.
The rate of fatalities has dropped from 2 deaths per 1,000 starts in 2009 to 1.25 deaths per 1,000 starts in 2022.
Victor Puente's Good Question segment from Wednesday showed a decline in deaths. That data comes from the Jockey Club.
We really do need to remember how well these horses are taken care of, how we've reduced the number of severe injuries in horses.
Dr. Ruggles and other veterinarians here use preventative measures.
And we do advanced techniques such as nuclear scintigraphy, PET scans, digital radiography, ultrasound to find injuries or the signs of injuries.
These deaths might look like a blight on the horse racing industry, but Dr. Ruggles believes proper safety measures are in place.
The public should be aware that the industry as a whole is working very hard to prevent every equine injury we can.
In Lexington, Grayson Passmore, WKYT.